All right, we're recording. I do believe that this is episode 19 of Roaming Free Inside the Cage. We're going to be starting tonight on page 16, and we are still in chapter 1. Um, but we're moving through at a really good pace. If we had gone in order, we'd be further along. Um,
16
Before
or
we
18,
dive
Dave?
into the new material, is there anything left over from last week that didn't get fully developed? Anything that you've been thinking about? Questions? Anything like that?
Yeah, Dave, I want to go back to page 11 again.
Okay.
I'm yanking your chain.
Ah,
Oh,
here I was taking you
good one,
seriously,
Bill.
man.
We haven't been on page 11, in a couple of weeks. So
I thought we were on 18,
there's
Dave.
really good stuff there,
Well,
I
I want to go
think.
back to Roman numeral XXIII, so there.
Of course you do.
Yeah, go back.
Oh,
I'm
Vaughn is
practicing the
here.
meditation of forgetting.
Hi,
Uh,
Hi, Vaughn.
Zua Wong,
Vaughn.
meditation of forgetting, of oblivion. Absolutely. Zua
I thought we were
Wong.
on page 18, Dave. No?
No.
18?
Yeah, that's where I have it
Yeah.
too.
Do you have
Yeah,
us
'cause
there?
we finished that section of emotional connection, right?
Oh,
Love.
we did. We
Mm.
did. Actually,
Unless you
so
want
I
to go
think
back.
what we did was we went really fast to the second one. So let's start on page 17. We'll go really quickly through loss of emotional connection, and then we'll dive into the third one because we only got the first two paragraphs in. Oh no, that is the first two paragraphs, and loss of trust is the last one. So we'll start back there. Okay, so it looks like there's nothing. So what we're talking about, just to kind of reset the stage, are these three shocks of embodiment. So we've been talking about the experience of the infant, each one of us as infants, how we come in to this perfect presence, this undifferentiated um, experience of everything around us, ourselves, each other, it's all one, and how that then breaks down into the personalities that we are exhibiting now as adults and the different enneatypes that we may be exhibiting, all the other programs that are running in the unconscious, and so on and so forth. So what is it? What was the genesis of what we're going to see as our adult personality in all of its complexity, starting from the oneness of the infant? So each infant is kind of like a big bang, you know? At the big bang, the universe was all one thing. It was infinite heat and infinite motion. And as it expanded and cooled, it distilled down into all the complexity that we see now, 10 billion years later, if you subscribe to that sort of thing. An infant is sort of the same way. The infant psyche is born in that oneness. And then as it expands, it cools and it distills down into all the complexity that we see as adults. And so we're kind of running the clock backward, and then taking a look. What is it that breaks that down? So we were looking at the three shocks. The first one is the loss of wholeness. The second one is the loss of emotional connection. And of course, each of these is geared toward his definition of the soul as a being loving, aware. He says that's what the soul breaks down to: being, loving, and aware. And so that has to do with the three um, centers of experience, and everything is keyed to those three areas. And the loss of wholeness, the loss of emotional connection, being, loving, and then finally the loss of trust would be corresponding to the aware part. So let's take a look at the loss of emotional connection. We read this last week, but let's just go through it quickly. The second shock is the loss of connection. It is the infant's gradual realization that his or her emotional ties to a caregiver do not always bring pleasure and joy. Wow, really? For sure. Do all your emotional ties to the people around you always give you pleasure and joy? So it is not possible. Modern infant studies have elegantly described the infant's original readiness to form a deep and permanent emotional connection to caregivers. That's an interesting. So infants originally are completely ready to form these deep and permanent emotional connections to the caregivers, anyone around them. And it doesn't really matter to the infant. I mean, the mother is there, and so the mother is going to have that connection, but whoever is there is going to, the infant is ready to form these kind of connections. The technical term for this process is attachment. And we read the footnote on this last week. We don't need to read it again, but it's basically talking about the fact that this attachment is an evolutionary adaptation that's necessary for survival. Because as we were differentiating ourselves as a species, evolutionarily speaking, you know, our pelvises were getting narrower and our brain pans were getting larger. And so childbirth was really becoming a problem. You know, women couldn't have, they didn't have the width in the hips to be able to bear these children. So what happened is the infants had to be born sooner and sooner, smaller and smaller. And so of all the species, the human infant is born, it's like we're all preemies, right? We're not fully baked yet. Other animal species, you know, as soon as the goat plops out, within minutes it can walk and jump and do all the things it needs to do survive. And you got an infant, a human infant, that needs years to get to the point that it could possibly start to survive on its own. And so that attachment is absolutely essential to be able to have the connection between mother and child and mother and caregivers in general, to be able to protect that infant long enough that it's going to be able to be self-sustaining and be able to survive. And so this is, you know, this sounds a little screwy though, because it sounds like it's reducing love and devotion and the caregiving, especially the love of a parent, to this just, you know, biological and evolutionary inevitabilities. And what I find really interesting, though, is that I think that's why Jesus makes such a big deal about love of the enemy. Because if you only love those who love you, if you only love those who are of your own tribe, if you only love your own children, what have you really done? Jesus is saying, you know, everybody does that. But if you love the enemy, I think loving the enemy is the godlike love. Now we're experiencing the way God loves, not the way that we just love in any sort of way that gives us an advantage, either for ourselves or for our species or whatever. And so this love of the enemy becomes everything. It's the second mile, like we talked about. The first mile is a mile of obligation. You do that as a reward and punishment scenario, paradigm. But the second mile, you know, the voluntary mile, that's where all of that goes out the window and we're experiencing something completely different. Jesus is so brilliant at this, trying to make these kinds of distinctions in these simple ways that people could understand and really get their arms around. First and second mile, the love of the enemy versus the love of the neighbor. But I think that's what really separates us, you know, from all other species. You know, we can do this. Any thoughts on that?
I'm glad you went over it again. That I forgot about the pelvis narrowing and the reason for it. I forgot the progression. So
Yeah.
got it. Not that that was the whole point, but
It's a good point, though. All right. It's quite possibly the most important learning process of one's entire life. He's talking about attachment now. And it all takes place before one has language. Simply put, each baby is born with a heart wide open, ready to make a deep and lasting commitment to its caregiver. This deep connection is, in a way, a buffer against the first shock of embodiment. That would be the loss of wholeness. It softens the blow of being in a physical body, but it brings its own hardships as well. Deep emotional pleasure cannot always be maintained in human relationships. I would change that always to never. Deep emotional pleasure can never be maintained in human relationships. We're always in a state of oscillation. We're always moving back and forth. That's why we even experience our relationship with God as an ebb and flow, not because God is oscillating, but because we are, you know. We are the ones who are oscillating. God's a constant, but we're oscillating back and forth. And so we can still say in all sincerity, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because that's exactly what it feels like. And that's our reality from that perspective, even though God has not gone anywhere. And he says that the natural ebb and flow of emotional connectedness over time can leave an infant with an occasional sense of being unseen and unimportant. Repeated exposure to such experiences can produce a basic belief that one is fundamentally invisible and unlovable. Gradually, the capacity to remain fully open to emotional experience closes down the baby's original capacity for joy. Just as a loss of wholeness produces anger, the loss of connectedness closes down the infant's capacity to experience joy. For some children, it begins a lifelong effort to make themselves more visible and more lovable. The effort often serves as a second basic kind of emotional engine for ego development. And in my experience, I'd say that all of us, at some level, are vying for this sense of acceptance. We're all trying to prove something, right? We're all trying to find a way to be able to prove ourselves worthy of, to get the acceptance of others. That insecurity that is basic to all of us is there at some level or another. And when it's really, really extreme, well, then of course it really becomes a driving force in a person's life. But I think it is there in all of us to some degree. And I think it also ties in with Thomas Keating's, 3 pairs of biological needs. Remember when he talks about the need for security and survival, the need for power and control, and the need for esteem and affection. Those 3 pairs of drives are really what are driving us all. And if you kind of roll it all back, what's the fear behind those drives? Well, fear is that we're not going to be accepted, we're not going to be connected, we're not going to be able to get the things that we need in life. So those are what drive us forward. So I think we're all in that place where we're trying to make ourselves more visible and more lovable, trying to make sure that we stand head and shoulders above the rest so that we can have the kind of control that we crave out of our fear. Any comments there?
I think sometimes the opposite reaction can happen because I find this in myself that, yes, who doesn't want to be accepted, right? So, but if I find that I won't be accepted in the group, I will say, fine, then I won't accept you first. I reject you first. That's my irascible personality.
Well, obviously, if you keep trying, if you keep banging your head against the wall, eventually you will stop, right?
Yeah,
It's just like, why do you bang your head against the wall? Because it feels so good when I
right.
stop, you know?
Well,
No, although I do know some people who keep trying to the point where I find it's exhausting for that person and that it causes, you know, worse things, depression or anxiety or, worse things.
Mhm. Yeah, if the child who tries to, gain the favor just repeatedly finds that it can't, then it's going to stop trying. So then you have the overachiever and you have the delinquent, the 2 basic poles to all of this. And of course, they're both going to be present, but really they're both, effects of the same cause. We really do want that connection. And it's just a question of, like you said, if you really think you're not going to get it, well, then you'll just check out eventually. But I think it's
and I
there in all of us to some degree. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
I see that as in kind of taking off from what you just said, Dave, that sentence, just as a loss of wholeness produces anger, the loss of connectedness closes down the infant's capacity to experience joy. I could also see that, being they just build walls around them and they don't get close to anyone after that because they're afraid of getting hurt, because they're afraid they just won't reach anyone. So therefore they don't reach out. And, we've all been around people that close themselves off and they don't know how to connect with someone. And I think that could be a result of that as well. I think we just got a Cliff Notes version of child development here. Sort of.
That's basically what we
Yeah.
are getting. Yeah, absolutely. And he was a child psychologist, so he's this is his area. So
Mhm.
he's giving us the benefit of his wisdom. But
Here's the
yeah, go
good
ahead.
news, though, in terms of attachment. There's a lot of research on attachment and attachment theory, and the good news is that it's not a rigid attachment style, whether we're secure or insecure. It can change over a lifetime based on who we're with. And that's the good news. So I think that's important to kind of also know in reading into
Absolutely.
this because it's a little doomsday. It's like um,
Let's
it's
see.
not over in
Oh, no.
childhood. We get other choices.
Well, I can just tell you from my own experience. I mean, that's what my 20s and 30s basically were all about, was trying to prove myself. You know,
Mhm.
you want to talk about the inner critic, Becky? You know,
Yeah.
I had my inner critic was the size of the Hulk, and it was always in there and it was always driving me on to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It was just relentless because I always felt on the outside looking in, and I just really wanted to be on the inside for once. And it really wasn't until I started practicing contemplation in my early mid 30s that I was able to start to overcome that, to find an inner worth, to find an inner self that didn't have anything to do with all of that stuff that grounded me in a way. I can't say that I'm completely free of it, but man, the tail doesn't wag the dog anymore. It's such a different feeling, a completely different feeling, because it's absolutely exhausting to constantly try to play the room, to constantly try to get, all of your self-worth out of the approval of others or the applause or whatever it happens to be. To be able to just enjoy what you're doing for the sake of doing it is amazing.
I think he's a little too glib here, you guys. I mean, he says basically the loss of wholeness produces anger. So all of us are going to lose wholeness, right? We have a shot at getting some of it back, but between wholeness and connectedness, are we all angry?
Well, I mean, if you go back, I'm trying to find it.
Right. I look too, Dave.
It's back on page 16 someplace. Oh, no,
Maybe
Like,
they're the
top of page
continuum.
17. So when he says, starting on page 16, um, gradually their ability to remain fully present is obscured. He's talking about with this loss of wholeness. They're no longer able to be simply and completely open to all experience. Some of it's just too painful. Those infants whose discomfort reaches overwhelming levels can develop a chronic sense that being a body involves more or less constant sense of both pain and feeling separate. The lost sense of wholeness tends to generate a dull, visceral, and often unconscious sense of anger about being an individual center of consciousness tied to a physical body. So he's talking about when the discomfort reaches overwhelming levels. So it's not everybody or everything, but it can lead to that kind of frustration that could, I suppose, metastasize into anger. But yeah, we can't. I think what you're trying to say, Bill, is you just can't, paint with too broad a brush. Is that what you mean?
yeah, yeah. I mean, because this thing applies like 100% to me, but I'm not everybody. I mean, certainly there must have been an off-ramp to all that anger somewhere along the way before we had words for it, like between the loss of wholeness and the loss of emotional connection. And I'm bad on that one too, because I didn't have the emotional connection either. But this broad brush does bother me a bit because you've got to have it for attachment theory to pan out. But is that the only way, guys?
No, I don't think
Good
they're
night,
saying that
Scotty.
though, Bill. I don't think he's saying it. How about the little kids who go into their rage and their tantrums? Where is that kind of rage coming from? From the frustration of all of this. I don't know. I'm
And
certainly
that's the
not
other
doing that.
thing, that anger it's a continuum, or a range.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there are a lot of different levels of that. You can be irritated, you can be cranky. You know, it doesn't have to be full-blown rage.
Frustrated, resentful. Mhm.
Yeah.
Spectrum.
I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Jerry? You have to unmute.
She's not muted. Oh, wait.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was thinking about my two children, and But what, like I had one child that was happy, joyful from the day he was born. I don't ever, now later in life, anger did come out. So maybe it was there, but not as a baby or not as a young man, not till later. And then my daughter came out screaming and screamed for 3 months. She came out angry. She did not want to come out. She made me wait 2 weeks for her.
Oh,
You think this is connected? I mean, I'm kind of with Bill. It's like I have both, can't relate to this because one child was happy and lovely, and the other child angry,
well, Jerry, I think
and
you're
she
going
did
back too
struggle.
far. I mean, if you're talking about
Am
in
I?
utero, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about that these traits start to manifest about 6 months, 6 months to the back end of the first year, is he's saying
Oh,
that these actually start to manifest. So in that first 6 months, the baby more or less has this undifferentiated sense of presence and connection. These
uh-huh.
these shocks to the system, shocks to embodiment are coming in later. And so it's not what you're talking that's necessarily what
Oh,
you're talking about. And what he's talking about in terms of either the loss of wholeness, metastasizing into anger, and the loss of what's the second one? Emotional connection,
Emotional connection.
into the
uh-huh.
loss of joy. That's going to be coming later. And it's, as Lori says, it's on a spectrum. And some kids aren't going to really have to go there at all. He's talking about when, like he said, whose discomfort reaches overwhelming levels can develop this chronic
Okay.
sense that can lead to
Yeah, because
anger.
she did. My son always was a happy, but then yeah, I would say by maybe 6 to 8 months, then she was a happy baby and a happy little girl. And okay. So it wasn't like in the first 6 months, it's after that it
That's
happened.
what he's talking about. Yeah. So this is
Oh,
a
okay.
nature nurture thing, right?
Uh-huh.
This is going to be a nurture thing. So as the
Okay.
baby is growing and is experiencing life within the family, these things are going to start to come out because no childhood is perfect. And so there are always going to be these shocks to the system. We have to
Right.
learn these. We have to learn, the loss of wholeness. We can't stay in that state or we're going to be slobbering infants our entire lives. We can't do that. I sometimes think that maybe that's what Down syndrome children are, that they stay in this state, because even in their 30s or whatever, they still kind of exhibit that wholeness to their presence and that complete acceptance of whoever is there. If you've been around Down syndrome kids and young adults at
Yeah.
all, you
Yeah.
see that in them. It never seems to go away.
Yeah.
That's on one hand makes them so endearing, but on the other hand, it makes them non-functional in the adult world.
Dependent.
Yeah. Yeah. So something you just made me think of, something that's, I don't know what the word is, really strong or a big thing, like a divorce. My son, his father and I split early because of some, anyway. But when my daughter, she was older when it happened and was very angry and very upset with both of us. So is that something that could separate that connectedness and bring on the anger?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Now he's
All
talking
right.
about really, really early on. I mean, in the first year, a child's not going to be aware of a
Right.
divorce, as itself, but the child will be aware of the tension that is certainly in the house. The child will be aware of the lack of attention that he or she gets because of everybody's attention being blown out with all the distress and trauma going on.
Mhm.
And that will affect them in this way.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
these are the stressors in childhood that create the underlying programs that are creating our primary ways of dealing with such challenges that are going to then show up in our enneatypes and show up in our personality types and so on and so forth.
Mhm. Gee, thanks. Now I feel even more guilty.
Right?
Just-
Yeah.
You let's read the next paragraph because that leads into what I wanted, exactly where you're at, Jerry. But Bill's point is well taken. We don't want even what he's saying here to create more labels for us to have to sit in. I mean, we don't want the enneatype to become a label that we sit in, and we certainly don't want some of his psychological generalities to become labels for us to sit in. but they are giving us a spectrum. And most importantly, what he's trying to point out is that these are the shocks. These are the reasons that we as children develop the adult personalities in the first place, because we go through these stages of child development. Not exactly the same in each one, but they are there. All right, so now let's go into loss of trust. This is the third one. So one of the most important distinguishing characteristics of each baby's original energy is receptivity to others. Infants instinctively trust in the presence of as yet unknown persons who will be mindful of them. This capacity is so crucial to the flourishing of the spiritual life. This capacity, let me say that and start that again. This capacity, so crucial to the flourishing of the spiritual life, is once again an evolutionary heritage. Babies come into the world ready to make a connection to whomever is there. They do not demand references or credentials from their caregivers. They arrive ready to trust, ready to share their bodies, hearts, and eventually their very awareness with them. But over time, real life challenges that trust. Babies discover that people can just pick them up and put them down where they please, or that they can shut them away and forget about them. They come to recognize and perhaps even to expect their caregiver's failure to provide a perfectly secure holding environment. Even the best intentioned and best prepared parents are sometimes unavailable. With some regularity, they can misjudge or simply not notice their infant's needs. An unpredictable, overly intrusive, withholding, depressed, or angry parents can so deeply traumatize some babies that they become chronically fearful and mistrustful of the very people on whom they must most depend. In such cases, they develop an unspoken but pervasive belief that their original state of trust was simply too dangerous to maintain. As a result, fear and mistrust become yet a third source of emotional energy for the developing ego. The point that popped into my head here is I think what you were alluding to, Jerry, is that there are no perfect parents. There are no perfect parents. None of us can create a perfectly, whole and trusting and emotionally secure environment. It's just not possible because we're human and we're oscillating all over the place. And depending on what's happening in the world, in the community, and in the family, then we're going to be oscillating more or less all over the place. And all of that's being affected by the child. But the point is that we're not supposed to create a perfect environment for the child. The child is supposed to endure the shocks of embodiment, is supposed to endure the usual mix of abandonment and mistrust and neglect and all the things that happen in human life. That's part of life, and it's necessary for us to experience it. And if the child is going to actually be motivated to move into the adult world, then it's going to be a wounding that takes him or her there. It's the hero's journey all over again. The hero's journey begins with a wounding. There has to be that wounding. There has to be that desire to move from one place to another, or no motion occurs. And so it's not the parent's job to be perfect. It's not our job. It's not possible, and it's not our job. What our job is to limit the amount of trauma so that the child doesn't get knots tied in his or her cord that are so tight that they just can't possibly get them out in a lifetime. That's what we're trying to avoid. And most of us do that. Not everybody, but most of us can do that. So we
That
don't
seems like
feel guilty. Go ahead, Bill.
It seems like an awfully low aspiration. I mean,
I don't
I'm
think
glad.
so.
I'm glad I didn't have any significant trauma in my early childhood. But if that's all it takes, you know what I'm saying?
Well, look at it this way, though. Pain is like perfume. Open the bottle anywhere in the room, and eventually you'll smell it everywhere, right? So your pain, no matter how small it is, whatever it is that you got to worry about as a kid, is going to be your whole world. That's just the way that we operate. And so when we are looking relatively between families where some kids are raised literally by wolves and others have this beaver cleaver kind of upbringing, and you think, oh my God, what do you have to complain about? Well, your hangnail will become the most important thing to you if that's all you've got to worry about, and it will mess you up. I can look back on my childhood and say, hey, it was really pretty cleaverish. And yet I got into my 20s so screwed up. I mean, it took me 15 years to even get a handle on what I was trying to do. And so, it doesn't take a lot. It's your pain, whatever your pain is. Maybe that's one of the beautiful things about the way God constructed this life is that it's kind of self-leveling in a way.
Mhm.
We all get exactly what we need, and it's just up to us to do something with it.
Doesn't it also make a difference to the child? I mean, now you go back to the Enneagram, maybe too young for an Enneagram to be identified as a child, but different children handle things differently. So one kid is just lay back and goes with the flow and stuff just doesn't bother them. And then another child is extremely intense and very bothered and has a whole different aura about them. So I mean, it comes back to, I guess, the child's DNA and just kind of what their makeup is and how they approach the world, really. So, and the parent can still be doing all the same things to both children, and you're going to get different reactions.
Exactly. So that's the nature and nurture again, right? That's
Right.
Jerry talking about her two kids. They came from the same person, they're living in the same home, and yet look how different they were right out of the chute.
Right. Totally different.
And if you've had more than one kid, then especially if you've had three or more, then you really know, man, they are all different. There's stuff in them that we didn't put there, at least as far as we can tell.
There's no way to say we treated them exactly the same. It's not, we raised them exactly the same. It's not true.
Well, that's not possible either, but we can be
Right.
fairly consistent, and,
Yeah.
and yet they
Yeah.
still are going to react differently.
Mhm.
One of the things I
Yeah.
also wanted to bring up, was someone trying to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Kathy was saying, because, my daughter has 6 girls, and every one of them is different. There's no two alike. And these last 4 that are being raised, the last 5 that are being raised by her current husband, I watch the changes and the differences, and I'm amazed. Just like Kathy was saying, they're being raised by the same parents, but every single one of them is different, personality wise, mood wise. So it's true. I just want to support Kathy and what she said, because I'm watching it, with these girls and same parents, but each one's different.
Mhm.
And I don't, so I struggle with these things about even at 6 months or 10 months, or I don't know. I'm having a hard time, like Bill is like, I'm having a hard time grabbing some of this because I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about it and keep listening. So,
I mean,
okay.
I can,
Once again, Jerry, take what you need and leave the rest. If there are
Yeah, no, I
concepts
am.
here
I
that do
am.
not do anything for you and do not advance your cause, then put them on the shelf.
Yeah,
'Cause-
I will. I will. But I'm willing to listen and be open. I'd love to hear more from Becky and William because they're in the field and they know this stuff too, that their opinions are what we've been reading. Put you on the spot, guys.
I think that we have to be a little careful here because he really is generalizing. And he's dealing with the nurture aspect, not nature, not what we come in with. And that's a whole different arena that's equally important. So I think it's more, can we just kind of look at this as a generalization and hold it and see what he's going to do with it and where he's going to take it? It's sort of like looking at a quarter of the piece of the whole pie, and we're trying to make it the whole pie.
Yeah, and remember what he's doing here. He's just trying to give us a little backgrounder. This is not the central thesis of the book, as Becky is saying. It's a backgrounder. Where did this come from? Where did our enneatypes come from? Why is it that we have these primary ways of dealing with the challenges in our lives or the difficulties in our lives? Why are they even there? So I think he's just trying to say, hey, this comes from a central source as us during child development. Yeah, but it's not going to be the be all and end all. So I think what you're feeling, Jerry, what Bill's feeling, what a lot of us are feeling is that, yeah, we can't take these generalizations too far, but I think they can give us a broad outline of where we all came from as infants. And as far as this idea that we can't be perfect parents and shouldn't be perfect parents, I want to revisit something from our last book, Falling Upward with Richard Rohr. There's something that we also had a hard time getting our minds around was the idea of necessary suffering. A lot of us did not like this concept. But let's just review it and remember that Richard Rohr's concept of necessary suffering refers to unavoidable life events. And that's important, unavoidable life events. These aren't the things that we create. It's not the drama that we create, right? Unavoidable life events that force us to let go of control and our ego, leading to spiritual growth and deeper reality. It's a pattern of falling or suffering that, when accepted, cracks open our old self and becomes the place where the light enters. This is different from unnecessary suffering, which comes from resisting inevitable pain. So what are the key aspects? Resistance to control. Rohr suggests that we can cause unnecessary suffering when we resist letting go or refuse to accept legitimate pain, a necessary part of growth. Suffering is not a punishment, but a universal experience that can teach trust, allow for vulnerability, and foster spiritual growth. An unavoidable life pattern. Many people will experience a major setback, such as a job loss, illness, or loss of a loved one, that their current coping mechanisms cannot fix. A pathway to new reality. This forced falling or suffering is necessary to break down the false self and open us up to a new, more authentic reality. The wound as a gateway. This will be the hero's journey idea, right? The pain of necessary suffering creates a crack in our life, which is the very place where grace and new understanding can enter. Contrast with unnecessary suffering. Necessary suffering is chosen or accepted, while unnecessary suffering is caused by our resistance to the things we cannot control. And finally, a source of solidarity. By acknowledging our own suffering, we are better able to recognize and support the suffering of others. Now, of course, this is all in the context of the adult, not the infant, not the unconscious pre-cognitive infant. But I think that the principle follows that even as children, we are going to need the necessary suffering that is going to propel us through childhood and into the adult world. We need that wounding to motivate us to move forward. Otherwise,
Dave, would it
we
be
get
too
stuck.
much trouble to share that with the group when you send out the paperwork?
It is a huge burden, but Lori, I'm going to take it on for you. No, absolutely. That whenever I create these, I'll automatically drop them into the attachment of the thing. So yes, you will get them.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It is no problem at all. But this was something that we talked about in Falling Upward. And I remember spending, like a whole hour. We got off on all sorts of bunny trails when you brought up this idea. And then we would keep cycling back to it because it was something that was it's really hard to accept this, especially when it's been burned into us that, becoming a Christian and following God is supposed to put us into sweetness and light, and when we hit suffering, then we're supposed to pray it away. Something must be wrong. Why did God let this happen? Allow this to happen. Are we being punished? Are we being chastised? Are we being taught
What
something?
did we do wrong? Yeah.
Exactly. So coming over to this idea where we see what necessary suffering really does in our lives is really important for us to understand. But I think it also now as parents looking back, we got to recognize, okay, yeah, we messed up, and our kids, are dealing with some of the things that we created for them in their childhood. But that's also necessary. To find a way through that, to be able to work through that is pretty much why we're here. Right?
Or when it comes to suffering too, I don't think many parents really want to see their children suffering. So they want to do everything they can to try to take that away, to make it stop, to remove it, to blockade it, so it's this mind game that we play with kids, right? We don't want that to happen, but at the same time, then there's the side that says, well, they probably need to feel the pain so they'll learn this. But really, the parent doesn't want to see the child suffer.
But we can obviously go too far. That's being a helicopter parent is all about, right? And being overprotective. When you think about the way we were raised, most of us here are boomers, the way we were raised, with the wooden spoon and the no helmets and cigarettes and closed up cars and all the kind of things that we had to endure, are we better off as adults or the millennial generation that really got coddled so much as infants that they aren't prepared to deal with some of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? So yeah, there's got to be a medium,
Happy medium.
maybe our parents went too far in the 50s and the 60s, but I know that I probably didn't go far enough in the 80s and the 90s. So
I want to
See the
add a
difference.
comment.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, sorry. I want to add from the comment of the others too. This was from 5 minutes ago, where we have our children, or I have my siblings that, we were all the same parents, the same environment, the same home. I don't think it ever is for anybody. It's the same. Because already on the outset, you were born with whatever personality you have, like you can see with your daughters, right? But it's also, I can see the difference in our birth order. There's 6 of us in my family. You can see the difference in the birth order. Not only that, whether you're male or female. Then I look back at my parents. They grew up during the Second World War. They were little kids. And then my dad, there's 8 of them. Some were born during the war. They were 5, 6 years old. Some were born during the war. Some were born after. Not only that is the environment of the world, but it's also the stage of life of the parents. So I don't think anybody ever can be in the same home.
Yeah.
There's so many factors. Yeah.
I agree, Ellen.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can see the difference in my two children, because they're 12 years apart. And, I raised her, in a different decade than I raised him. And I can see that I was more of a relaxed parent because my parents were much more relaxed when I raised him. And then I became much more of a helicopter mom when I raised my daughter 12 years later. And I think you're right, Ellen, because it was the environment, it was what was happening. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Ellen. I agree with you on that. Not that you need it, I just wanted to add to it.
Just
Go
to
ahead.
take it one step further too, in terms of gender differences, there's some pretty solid research on infants and parents, and that parents who have a son will hold him out here, and a daughter gets held here.
Wow. Oh,
and you
wow.
wonder why men are so screwed up.
Speak for yourself, brother.
Talk about big loss of connection.
Or that maybe male babies don't need as much cuddling as females. I don't know. There are probably all kinds of different theories of what people think, but it seems like today's moms just cuddle their babies, doesn't matter what they are lately. But
It's the Simba thing, remember? Holding the baby up.
Yeah,
Right. So there's not just 3, there's an infinite variety of ways we can get screwed up.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's finish off this section.
Okay.
Bottom of page 18. The gradual loss of trust in the outside world also has an internal effect. Babies do not at first recognize themselves as separate psychological beings. I love that. Babies do not at first recognize themselves as separate psychological beings. In other words, they don't know they're naked, right? They are like supremely good dancers who move with their partner as though they were one being. Their feelings, like their patterns of attention, tend to move in synchrony with those of their caregivers. When I read that sentence, I immediately thought of, remember the E.T. movie? When the little boy and the E.T. are in symbiosis and their sine waves are perfectly aligned on the monitor. And then when the ET starts getting sick, then they diverge finally. But in that initial part, they're completely in sync. So their feelings, like their patterns of attention, tend to move in synchrony with those of their caregivers. In the beginning, infant consciousness is experienced as shared awareness or the intuition that all awareness is the same. That's kind of heaven, right? What would heaven be except being experienced as a shared awareness with the intuition that all awareness is the same, all consciousness is the same? Is it the conscious awareness characteristic? It is the conscious awareness characteristic of I. Remember the difference between I and me? Me being the content of our personality that we can think about, that we can enumerate, that we can express, and the I being that inexpressible, deeper self that can only be experienced in real time. But by the second half of the first year of life, there we go, Jerry, right? But by the second half of the first year of life, this awareness is submerged by a powerful new form of consciousness. Babies learn that they are psychologically separate from their parents. They become aware that they can have their own feelings and can pay attention to something even though no one else is paying attention to it. That's a really cool distinction, I think. Remember when he was talking about the being aware of others' awareness, and he gave the example of that little baby girl that was the mother would sing, and when the baby, what did the baby do? Hold her hands up like she was directing, and then she'd drop her hands, and the mother would stop, and she'd laugh, and then she'd raise her hands, she'd start singing again. So she was almost like directing the choir, but that shared awareness between the two of them. But now at a certain point, the baby can have their own feelings and pay attention to something even though no one else is paying attention to it. So they're diverging now. The sine waves are diverging. They can have their own attention that doesn't have to be attached to anybody else's. As their consciousness gradually separates out into a state in which self and other are sensed as distinct, any developing mistrust of others also starts to extend inward toward the child's own self. He begins to mistrust his own capacity to influence others and produce desired results. Not only does the environment seem dangerous, but the child's ability to influence it seems too weak and inefficient. Eventually, the child loses confidence in his or her ability to reconnect to the original state of presence, joy, and shared awareness. With this, the loss of original energy becomes complete. Loss of wholeness, emotional connection, and trust ultimately entail loss of the ability to be present and joyful in shared awareness. What is left is an ego, struggling to survive in a world that seems alternately yet unpredictably comfortable and harsh, loving and lonely, trustworthy and downright dangerous.
Welcome to the big bad world.
Exactly. Huh?
Tossed out of the garden.
You know, when you read this and then you think back to the Genesis story, isn't it just amazing how they were able to capture? I mean, we're talking about what? 4,000 years ago, maybe, when Genesis was written?
Wow.
You know, before any hint of psychology, as far as we know, the way we understand psychology, was present. And yet to be able to capture the essence of this development process in such poetic but so revealing terms, to me, it's breathtaking. Then I suppose the question is, what do we do with all of this? And that's where he's going to go next. The three shocks, the centers of awareness, and the Ennea type. So we've only got a couple more pages, and then we'll be out into the next chapter, which is actually going to deal with the three fundamental aspects of life energy. So we're just about out of this first chapter. So he'll tie it up a little bit. But yeah, the question for yourself is, you know, how important is this? Is this really going to be something that's going to help you, you know, going forward? And I think Becky's right. We just got to give it some time to let him develop and start to bring a lot of these themes together as he goes forward. But But that's the ultimate goal. We're not just learning this to learn this. How is this really contributing to our understanding of ourselves? That's really what this is all about. Ultimately, we want to understand ourselves, not just the Enneagram. We want to understand ourselves using the Enneagram as a tool so that we can then be able to transcend any of the limiting, types or programs that are running in our background.
Just an observation. I don't know if all of you see this last screen that came up on my computer.
I think that's Vaughn.
I was at Nashville.
That's Vaughn Giving.
Yeah, that's me.
At Nashville.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's messing with us.
Okay. All
Just a
right.
comment.
Gotcha.
Can't read what it says, actually. but-
Can't read the comment because it's cut off and the thing is over it, but
Yeah.
you can certainly see those eyes and the
It
barcode.
says essentially we're born with a religion and many other things from birth. Born to American, or Christian, or if born in Iran, you're Muslim, given a name, given a religion, so that sort of thing. You're born with an ID, being who you are.
Lots of labels.
We don't know that at first, but
No, but it becomes fairly clear pretty fast. I knew I was a Christian from very early on. So, and if I was in Iran, I'd be a Muslim. So.
All right. Any last burning desires? Any comments? Ellen, come on. We've got 2.5 minutes. You must have the meaning of life on the tip of your tongue, right?
Yeah, I do. But I disagree with Vaughn's caption.
Of course
Vaughn,
you do.
I'm sorry, but I do disagree because you revolve in a world of the majority. You're born in Iran, the majority, yes, Muslim, but not necessarily.
Yes, but the majority, yes.
Majority, yes.
You're right. Yes, vast majority.
Statistics, probability, okay.
Vast majority.
Yes.
I don't know, William. Your perch as devil advocate is being challenged by
I
Ellen.
know, that's fine. That's good. That's what it's for. I'm doing it only because of Nina, actually.
William was always our devil's advocate. He'd always come up. So
she encouraged me to do that. She encouraged me to bring my thoughts.
All right. Well, I'm happy to dethrone William. How's that?
She's the resident.
Yes,
She's the resident heretic now. So
be more valuable to you.
Yeah.
Not to hear from you, William.
Oh, I was agreeing with everything that was said.
But you can't do that.
looking like a true 9, William.
No, we want you to disagree.
How many sessions did you have today, William?
10.
Okay, that's why he's brain dead.
Sorry. That explains it.
10 sessions. Oh my gosh.
That's
Crazy, buddy. Good
Becky,
job.
I just want to say thank you because you said something so profound that I had to write it down right away. Attachment changes over a lifetime based on who we're with. And that has such hope in it. I'm so grateful to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's why we keep Becky around,
Exactly.
All right. I think, did we lose Scott? We did.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he said he'd probably have to check out a little early. Oh, and we don't have Danielle tonight. Yeah, I just realized that.
Oh, I know.
She's the usual one that I go to close in prayer if Scott's not here. So I got my 1 and 2. Would anyone like to close us in prayer? Not all at once.
Marion, you say beautiful prayers.
That's right,
Putting you on the
Marion. Come on,
spot.
dear.
You say beautiful prayers, Marion.
Yeah. All right. Holy Father, we just thank you that we were able to come together tonight and hear the words and learn more about the Enneagram. And I just thank you, Lord, for this group, for the openness of sharing, and for the things that we learn every single week, Lord. We know that's coming from you. So We thank you and we love you, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Marion.
Beautiful.
Jerry.
Thank you, Mary.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Another
Bye.
good discussion.
Okay.
We'll see you on
Good night,
Sunday.
everyone.
See you guys.
Right.
Bye, Jordana.
See ya.
Good night,
Jordana,
Judy.
good to see you, sweetie.
Bye.
Love you guys.
Good
Bye.
night, everyone.
Bye, Judy.
Good night.
Good night, Judy. Good night, Vaughn. Good night, Jordana.
Okay, see you
Ciao.
Sunday.
See you Sunday, dear. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.